My friends, there comes a moment in history when absolute power encounters a physical boundary that it cannot cross. Alexandre de Moraes has just run headlong into that boundary, and what began as a series of court orders within Brazilian territory has just turned into an international diplomatic and legal incident that the Supreme Federal Court does not know how to contain. Now, understand the logic of what's happening. The power that seemed unlimited within the three powers square evaporated when it crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Moraes believed that the Supreme Federal Court's official email was his global sword. He didn't realize that by trying to summon American companies like Humboldt and Trump Media, ignoring international treaties, he was setting up the very trap that has now cornered him. Desperation has taken over behind the scenes in Brasilia in the last 24 hours because the justice system, the federal court in Florida, decided to use the same method against him. It's no longer a political fight on Twitter. It's a legal process on American soil where the rules from Brasilia aren't worth the paper they're written on. And now I'm going to show you why the system is going into technical collapse. Sovereignty is not an abstract concept. It's a steel barrier that Moraes tried to cross without a legal passport. Now subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video, because it takes work to make. The original sin of this diplomatic incident was strategic arrogance. Alexandre de Moraes believed that Brazilian jurisdiction could be exported via email as if a PDF attachment had sovereign authority within the territory of the United States. To understand the mistake, you need to know the 1965 Hague Convention. This is the international treaty that regulates the service and notification of judicial documents abroad. The procedure is clear and mandatory. The document must go through a central authority, being officially translated and delivered through the diplomatic channels of the destination country is a process that respects the sovereignty of nations. Moraes decided to ignore this procedure. He sent direct legal notices to Humboldt and Trump Media, demanding account blocks and user data from Americans using only email. He believed that the prestige of his position in Brazil would intimidate judges and lawyers in Florida. The technical detail he ignored is that in the United States, sovereignty is protected with absolute rigor. By sending that email, he wasn't just serving a company, he was attacking American legal sovereignty. And he acted as if the STF were a global court. The result was a Trojan horse that he himself sent into Brasilia. The Florida court not only ignored the orders, but also opened a case to analyze the legality of these actions. And here's the irony, my friends. The American judge summoned Moraes using the same method he used, email. Whoever uses email as a weapon ends up being judged by it. The arrogance of believing that the state's coercive power has no geographical limits created the biggest legal nightmare in the history of the Supreme Federal Court. Pay attention to the doctrine of logical preclusion. This is the technical concept that sealed Moraes' fate in this case. In international law, you cannot adopt contradictory positions to gain an advantage. If Moraes argues that email is a valid and legal means to summon American companies ignoring treaties, he cannot now claim that the summons he received from Florida via email is invalid. He created a precedent that will now condemn him. It's the mirror trap, my friends. Now Moraes is facing procedural checkmate. He has two clear paths and both lead to defeat. If he decides to defend himself in the Florida court, hiring a lawyer and filing petitions, he will be formally recognizing the authority of the American judge over him. He admits that he is a defendant under United States law. If he decides to ignore the case, believing that he is protected by the Brasilia bubble, he will be subject to a default judgment. In the United States, a default judgment in a case of aggression against sovereignty and civil rights can lead to the freezing of international assets, cancellation of visas, and even restraining orders that would prevent him from traveling to any country that has a cooperation treaty with the United States. In other words, he would only be able to travel to a few dictatorships. Not even China would risk taking him in if he were wanted. He's no longer a judge, my friends. He's the target of a legal proceeding that he himself validated through his previous conduct. You must have heard the proverb that says pride comes before a fall. My friends, he fell into his own trap. Contradictory behavior is the poison that the Brazilian system is trying to neutralize, but the antidote doesn't exist in American law. In the corridors of power in Brasilia, the atmosphere is one of coordinated panic. Emergency meetings between the Supreme Federal Court, the Attorney General's office, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs took place at a frantic pace. The central problem is that the Supreme Federal Court is trying to turn Alexandre de Moraes' individual, personal, and institutional mistake into a matter of state. They want the Attorney General's office to use your tax money to pay elite American lawyers to defend Alexandre de Moraes in Florida. So, do you want to pay for Alexandre de Moraes' defense? I don't want to. Understand this. Are you paying to defend a judge who violated international treaties for personal vanity? The attempt to use Loman? Using the organic law of the national judiciary as a shield is pathetic. Loman is meant to protect judges within Brazil's borders. For the federal judge in Florida, Loman doesn't apply on American territory. It has no extraterritorial power. In other words, there's no way an institution in Brazil can prevent an American institution from judging Moraes. My friends, he's going to get caught. The Itamaraty is in a panic because they know that protecting Moraes under these conditions turns Brazil into a diplomatic pariah. We already have Lula giving away rare earths to save Moraes, and now this on top of it. We are being seen as a country that protects aggressors against other nations' sovereignty. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs knows that if the Brazilian government formally takes up the defense of Moraes in this case, Brazil admits that the violation of the Hague Convention was a state policy and not an isolated mistake by a judge. And this opens the door to severe economic and diplomatic sanctions. The system is trying to create a collective shield, but the armor is full of technical flaws that the American justice system has already identified. Understand this. The international isolation of Alexandre de Moraes is just the first domino. What happens next is the transformation of Brazil into a legal pariah. The checkmate is as follows. If the Brazilian government insists on using the federal government's legal office to defend Moraes, it will be confirming to the world that the Brazilian judiciary does not respect international laws. And this drives away investments, increases the country's risk, and isolates our institutions even more. While Moraes tries to censor citizens and American companies through a computer screen, the Americans are using due process to expose the fragility and authoritarianism of the Brazilian system. The real consequences are imminent, my friends. Freezing of financial assets abroad, cancellation of visas for the entire family, and inclusion on international sanctions lists. This isn't about right or left. It's about the end of the illusion that man can rule the planet while ignoring the laws of other nations. The contrast is instructive. On one side, the brute force of a stroke of the pen order without due process. On the other, the silent and relentless power of American procedural law. Brazil is being put in a position where it will have to choose between protecting a judge who made a technical mistake or maintaining its credibility before the international community. The message for you watching is clear. The world is much bigger than Three Powers Plaza, and reality always exacts a price for arrogance. The noose has tightened. The Federal Supreme Court found out, in the worst possible way, that American law does not negotiate with those who ignore treaties and violate the sovereignty of others. They are trying to create a diplomatic way out, a golden bridge for Moraes to retreat, but the case in Florida has already taken on a life of its own. The mistake was strategic. The consequence will be historic. They tried to export censorship and ended up importing a legal case they can't control. The truth is not negotiable and has no borders. And if you understood that the isolation of Moraes is the direct result of ignoring the gears that move international power, you are ahead of those who still believe in the headlines of the mainstream press. And if now you are realizing that this goes much deeper than that, comment here. If Moraes is against the wall, write checkmate. If Moraes is going to get out of this unscathed, write arrogance. We expose the gears here without filters because information is the only weapon the system can't confiscate. If you want to have access and continue this uncensored analysis, join our exclusive platform. There are already more than 3,000 elite analysts who follow me every day and fund the truth that we bring here. But over there we don't have filters, we don't have some stroke of the pen order that can take us down. QR code on the screen, link in the description and in the first pinned comment. Come join this community that keeps growing. And I want you to also follow our series and movies channel. Yes, with a selection without culture war, without whining, recommending series and movies for you to enjoy with your family. Many times you're at home just hanging out, you want to watch a movie, but what should you watch? And you end up spending an hour trying to find a good show. Well, Shimon solved that for you. Here on the channel, there are excellent tips, including series that talk about the Middle East and this whole crisis and so on. It's there, link in the description, in the pinned comment, and here in the card. Now blend your mind, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like on the video. I'm Shimon Oliveira, and I'll see you next time. See you then.